Well, good morning, folks. And it is June 24th, and we are Wednesday already, which means tomorrow is Thursday. So don't forget, tomorrow we have drive-through communion from 5 to 5:30, and then, of course, we have the live stream of the service at 7. So don't forget that. That's tomorrow for Thursday. But today we are continuing on talking about the scripture found in First Peter. And we are now into the third chapter, and this is the day where I can go, Peter, what are you doing to me? Because quite honestly, we're into a little bit of scripture here that there's probably no way not to offend somebody. And of course, we've almost become a world of where that's the international sport is who can be offended. And if you want to be offended by Scripture, you can certainly find places in Scripture that will offend you if you're really looking for that. So let's not look to be offended, because that's not the goal in Scripture by any means, but rather to learn from it and to try to discern what is in it that we can take and use in our lives and to benefit us, to benefit others as well. Because that's the thing about this religion that we're in. It's not only about us, and we need to remember that. Too often we push it down to the individual about saving this one individual, but it's about us being in it together, and we want to save everybody. The goal is all. So it's not just about you. It's not just about me. In fact, very little if it's about me, in my opinion. But so we're in First Peter. We're going to jump into chapter 3, the first 7 verses, and we've been going through this so far here the last few days. What is sometimes called the table of duties, and I don't think I've called it that thus far, and that's my fault. But the table of duties, and it kind of goes through the responsibilities that we have to the governing bodies. Then we talk about what duties that we have to the authorities over us. That would be talking about slaves. We could apply that to our employers. Slave owner, but not to say that you're slaving for your boss, but the idea that we're dealing with here is our relationship to authority figures. We need to bear that in mind, okay? And so it is the table of duties, talking about authority and how we relate to authority. So I'm going to jump right into this so we can keep this short, and I'll try to remember to say a quick prayer at the end. Let's look at it, and I'm going to be reading from the NRSV today, and we're going to be cross-referencing back to the Revised Geneva translation, which is an updated version of the Geneva Bible. Those that know me might know that I really enjoy the Geneva Bible. Problem with the Geneva Bible is it's in Old English, and so therefore sometimes a little hard for us to utilize it. It's even worse than the King James Version. Though as an aside, many scholars believe the Geneva Bible is actually a superior translation as far as translating than the King James. But that's just another aside. And I probably offended somebody with that. But this is what the Pilgrims used, was the Geneva Bible. Remember that. And that's why they left England. The Geneva Bible is an interesting Bible because it has a lot of commentary in it, and it really dives into some things, and so it is a valuable resource if you can get past the old language. So with that, let's jump into chapter 3. We're going to look at the first 7 verses only, and we'll go from there tomorrow. Wives, in the same way, accept the authority of your husbands, so that even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won over without a word by their wives' conduct. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, do not adorn yourselves outwardly by braiding your hair and by wearing gold ornaments or fine clothing. Rather, let your adornment be the inner self, with the lasting beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in God's sight. It was in this way long ago that the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by accepting the authority of their husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. You have become her daughters as long as you do what is good and never let fears alarm you. Husbands, in the same way, show consideration for your wives in your life together. paying honor to the woman as the weaker sex, since they too are also heirs of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing may hinder your prayers. Okay. In the same way, it's talking about in the same way that we show authority to those authority figures we've talked about in the last few days. In the same way, you're saying the wives are going to accept the authority of the husbands. We have to remember, and we always have to remember when we're reading Scripture, in the history and within which it was written, and the society into which it was written. Most of you should know that there was an extraordinarily patriarchal society, much different than today. And so there, in a patriarchal society, the father is the boss. Okay, the father is the head of the household. Okay, and that is the way that it was, and they had a much greater power. And at the time of this writing, probably women were perceived as basically chattel, really, and chattel would be a possession. Okay, and so we have to be cognizant of that. We don't like it, and I'm sure that offends some folks, but we don't live in that world any longer. So we do have to be careful when we're looking at this, that we understand the world in which it was written. We likewise have to be careful that when we're doing that we don't use that as a tool to rationalize away all of the authority of Scripture. We can do that. We can be really overzealous with that club or that tool of trying to discern Scripture. We can really easily bury away anything we don't like, and that's been done a lot. But given this bit of Scripture, we're going to be careful here and try to dig away enough and leave enough behind so that we understand what this is saying into our lives and how God really wants us to be. Not saying that that's an easy thing to do, and not saying that that isn't offensive to some. But again, when we read Scripture and we find Scripture that's difficult, we have this tendency to want to run away from it. Oftentimes, that's the exact wrong thing. We should be spending some time in it and trying to discern what exactly it's saying, and not looking to be offended by it, okay? But looking to try to understand it. So it's all about the mindset that we have when we approach something. If I come to something angry, I'm going to leave angry, aren't I? If I come to something trying to understand it, hopefully when I leave, I might understand it. So, he's telling the wives here that, again, in this patriarchal society, you have this authority figure. So you have the husband is supposed to be the head of the household. And of course, and we see that also if we go over to some of Paul's writing, or what's thought to be Paul's writing. This is one of the contested scriptures in Ephesians, which is a famous bit of scripture. And in Ephesians 5, chapter 5, verse 23, for the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church. That's a famous line, and it's again another line that can be offensive. It's one of those things that, where I think my wife would take the theology of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. You remember that one, where the mother says, well, the husband's the head of the house, but the woman's the neck, and the neck can turn the head anywhere she wants. And that I think that there's some of that going on in First Peter here, where it's talking about that what you says, so that even accept the authority of your husband, so that even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won over without a word by their wife's conduct. The wife is obviously there to teach and to guide the husband. She's called to do it in a reverent way. It says when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. That's also translated in the Geneva Bible, as when they observe your upright character, which is with fear and fear of God, that your reverence, that you have this respect for God. And when they see that hopefully that brings them to God. So the woman is actually in a position of power there, because her power is to try to convince the husband to come to Christ. So that's not a lowly assignment by any stretch, is it? In fact, the wife, but through her teaching of the children, can bring the children to Christ as well. So it's the wife has a very important role there. verse 4, it says, rather let your adornment be the inner self with the lasting beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit that is very precious to God, talking about not braiding your hair and all of that. In verse 3, interestingly, some translations it says, do not let your adornment only be outward, which is an interesting thing. And I'm not sure that that's actually proper when I look at that in the Greek, but it is a way to look at that. Obviously, we want our true beauty to be in here, not out here. You know, this is a burden I've dealt with my whole life because I'm just basically looked at as a pretty face, you know. I'm kidding. It should be about the beauty inside, and again, that's not a small obligation, is it? That it would be easier to make yourself look prettier on the outside than it is truly to make yourself beautiful on the inside, I think, because it's easy to paint oneself up. It's harder to build oneself spirit up. So we want to look at this in the context of the thing we're in. We don't look at women as chattel by any stretch anymore. They're not possessions by any means anymore. They're an equal partner, but we have responsibilities. Gets into verse 7, and it says, husbands in the same way, just like before, just like with the wife. So there is some, it doesn't really say authority, but in some ways you have obligations, obvious and very defined, I shouldn't say defined, but very important obligations to the wife. You're to pay honor to her, you to show consideration for her. In Ephesians it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now that's a deep and abiding love. That's an obligation to love, protect, to give yourself up, to sacrifice yourself for your wife. Again, that's no small order by any stretch. There is a word in here that in verse 7 that I think is an unfortunate word, the way that the NRSV translates it, and I don't like it, and I don't understand why they did it. They translate it as paying honor to the woman as the weaker sex. That word that's translated as sex does not mean sex. It's a neutral word. It's not in Greek. You have masculine and feminine words, nouns, and that doesn't mean either. It's a neutral word. Actually means vessel, container. It can mean dishes. Okay, like a serving dish or something. And so one of the more interesting metaphors I saw for that was that comparing your everyday dishes and your fine china. Which is more valuable? Fine china. The wife is the fine china. Which one do you protect? Which one do you try do your best to take care of? The china. The everyday dishes gets tumbled around and gets stuck in the dishwasher. The china doesn't go in the dishwasher. You wash it by hand. You put it away immediately after using it. You don't leave it out on the counter. You don't leave it in the sink. You don't leave it in the dishwasher. And so it's the care for that vessel is much more important and devout. And so I like that, and because I've always, I've never understood, and I probably get myself in trouble, never understood the idea of the women's lib movement of wanting to be equal to men. Why would a woman want to be equal to me when they're superior? I hold women in much higher regard than I hold men, and that's terrible to say that, and I didn't say that. I'll take it back. But I do. I think women, in many ways, are superior to us, and I think many men think that way. That's why we love our wives. That's why we cherish our wives. That's why we protect our wives, because to us they are more precious than our friends, and they should be. And we should treat them that way. We shouldn't be running off to go be with our buddies. We should be trying to spend time and to take care of the family. And so we need to do that. We need to model the way God takes care of us through our lives in taking care of our families. And same way, women are to do the same. It's an interesting thing. It is all about modeling God's excuse me. modeling our respect for others and authority figures as we model ourselves after our respect for God. If that makes any sense. That's what all this is about. If we get into this habit of never respecting anyone or never letting anyone have any authority over us, well, it's pretty easy to get to the point where we don't allow God to have any authority over us either. Because we've just got this notion that we are a force of one and nothing, the world can't prevail against us, and that's not what it's about. We have to have our place in order, table of duties. We have a place in this order, and that place is to be worshiping God, and God's wanting us to. We have to learn how to do that. Human spirit can be kind of impetuous and crazy, and we need to learn that. And we need to learn respect for authority figures. That really, quite honestly, is one of the biggest problems we have in the world today, is that there isn't much respect for authority figures anymore. And I see that in youth group, and I see that in a lot of places. And that's part of the big problem we have today. No one respects authority. And that's not scriptural, guys. We can't really call ourselves Christians going around saying you disrespect authority and that you always burn everything, and if we don't like it, we burn it down. That's not scriptural, not at all. So I'm sure I've done a good job of offending at least a handful of people today. More people watch this. We had a little bit of a light turnout today on our live stream for watching it, but that's okay. These always get much more watching it later. So with that, we'll move on from all of this stuff tomorrow, and we'll see if we can't try not to offend somebody tomorrow, okay? We've done enough of it today. God bless, and we'll see you in the morning.